logistics of walking for 30 continuous days and spending each night in accommodation along the way requires 2 vehicles. Each morning we pack the gear we don't want to carry into Charles' van. Yesterday Bill moved his utility to where we'll stay tonight. So at the end of each day's walk, Bill and Charles have to manage a rather difficult shuffle of vehicles to be ready for the next day. Balmain is an isolated, almost waterbound peninsula, rocky and precipitous. The early settlers found the topography pretty but unsympathetic. Yet it has always been intimately tied to Sydney and never remote. It's an inner suburb that's only minutes away from the CBD, by water.
We're now passing further evidence of change, the former Colgate palm olive factory, which opened in 1923, initially producing soap, then toothpaste, but which closed and then was converted to apartments in the late 1990s.
Almost everything European man has done here has been unplanned or accidental, chaotic even. Since its quiet beginnings, Balmain has been battered by wave after wave of uncontrolled demand from industries and speculators. It's miraculous any beauty survives here at all.
Hey, we've got a long way to go.
Where's Caro? She'd run up that way.
I made it.
Palm Beach.
Barangaroo.
1,000 miles away.
Where are we finishing?
Been staying on Cockatoo Island and ferrying across to various points. So we picked up Thames Street this morning. We're into the rocks tonight, and then we're off to South Head Sunday, and then down to Royal National next week.
Excellent. So you picked up a few stragglers on the way, but I met you going out.
And Sydney Harbour and Coastwalk.com.
Sydney Harbour and Coastwalk.com. No, nobody needs a cup of tea, glass of water.
We better keep going.
Water bottles.
Just fabulous. And then you're on this side of the harbour, and you can almost touch where you were last week.
Yes.
And it's taken us all that time.
A couple of cats over the door.
Oh, I see.
2 over the door. One leaping down somehow over here. And then there's one on the post. And I love my Norwegian forest cat. How about this cat? He's got a bit of a problem, this one. Bit off morning to chew.
Neville and Rand went to that school there, and it's still a school by the look of it.
Nicholson Street Public School was established in 1883 under the 1880 Public Instruction Act. It was designed by the government architect William Kemp in a free classical design thought to be more suited to public secular education, hence these pillars. Always the smallest of the Balmain schools, it now has about 130 students. One of its former students was none other than Neville Rand, Premier of New South Wales.
Neville Keith Rand.
You take the high road and I'll take the low, and Sydney are for you. The zigzag walkway at the bottom of Nicholson Street was in existence before 1900, but during the Adelaide steamship years, from 1900 onwards, casual workers would wait here of a morning on zigs or zags, according to their trade, hoping for daily employment in the Adelaide steamship works.
We commented on these Waterview Wharf workshops when we were at Ballast Point, but how the colours contribute to the vitality of the edge of the harbour. What's interesting as we walk along here is just how simple and cheap these materials are. They're just simple corrugated iron, but they've been painted sensitively just to give that vitality.
Balmain was part of the original 550-acre grant made to Dr. William Balmain in 1800. A year later, Balmain transferred his entire holding to settle a debt for the incredible price of just 5 shillings. Upon his death, his descendants challenged the legality of the transfer, and this blocked development for many years. The area was eventually subdivided during the 1840s. It became one of the premier maritime industrial centres of Sydney. Gentrification of Balmain began in the 1960s as industry waned. Increasing property values and waterfront development continued to push the suburb's remaining industry out, which brings the walkers to a very controversial development indeed, Barangaroo. Barangaroo was one of the powerful figures in Sydney's early history. She was from the country around North Harbour and Manly. Her Cammeraygal clan was the largest and most influential in the Sydney coastal region. Barangaroo was very likely present at the first meeting that took place between white newcomers and the Cammeraygal women at Manly in February 1788, an event captured in William Bradley's watercolour. These early meetings had much to do with gender. Were Aboriginal women available? And were these shaven, fully clothed white people men or women? On command, a sailor would drop his pants and a great cry would go up, "They are men!" Thereafter, the women were kept well away. The officers finally met Barangaroo in mid-September 1790. They found her very striking, but also a little frightening. By then the world had been changed by smallpox. Barangaroo had survived but lost a husband and 2 children, and now she had a new younger husband, the ambitious Bennelong. They estimated her aged about 40. The meeting took place when Governor Phillip, having quickly recovered after being speared at Manly, went by boat to meet Bennelong at his camp opposite Sydney Cove. Bennelong is in the front canoe, raising his paddle in the right hand and turning towards the Governor's approaching boat. Barangaroo is in the second canoe. This is the only known image of her. On shore, Bennelong received a metal hatchet, fishing lines and a red jacket, while Barangaroo was offered a petticoat and other gifts. She resisted Bennelong's urgings to come nearer the men, but Burong coaxed her forward by putting the petticoat on her. The men laughed at her modesty, Bennelong included, at which Barangaroo, humiliated, dropped the outlandish garment to stand naked before them, furious and glowering. Thereafter she refused all clothing, wearing at most a slim bone in her septum. In October 1790, Bennelong and some friends came in peacefully to Sydney, but Barangaroo was so unhappy about him consorting with the whites, she broke his fishing spear. Barangaroo and Bennelong were both determined and short-tempered. When he hit her, she hit him back, sometimes with a club. The officers were perplexed at how a couple who so clearly delighted in one another's company could be so violent to each other. Watkin Tench said she deserved her beatings because she was a scold and a vixen, and nobody pitied her. Why was Barangaroo trying to stop Bennelong's politicking and movements? Was she just a difficult woman? Grace Karskens thinks the answer may lie in fishing. Barangaroo was a fisherwoman. Eora women like her were the main food providers for their families, and the staple food of the coastal people around Sydney was fish. Unlike men, who stood motionless on the shore to spearfish with multi-pronged spears, women fished from their bark canoes, their naui, with lines and hooks. They made fishing lines by twisting together 2 strands of bark or fibre, and they honed the distinctive crescent-shaped fish hooks, burra, from the broadest part of the turban shell. These hooks were beautiful, and the lines well made. The women skimmed the waters in their simple bark canoes with fires lit on clay pads for warmth and cooking. The officers wondered how they could manage these contemptible skiffs, as they called them, with fishing tackle, on-board fire, small children and babies at the breast, sometimes in surf that would terrify their toughest sailors. The women sang together as they fished and kept time with their paddles as they rowed. They were seen fishing all day, in all weathers and at night too. They dominated the waters of the harbours, coves and bays, and the coastlines in between. The men mostly only used canoes when they wanted to get from one cove to another. Women's control of the food supply was essential to their status, self-esteem and power in society. So what may have triggered Barangaroo's anger at that first meeting with the whites, petticoats aside, was a massive catch of 4,000 Australian salmon hauled up in 2 nets. 40 fish of £5 each was sent over as a present to Bennelong's group, an extravagant, wasteful gift given from men to men. As an Eora fisherwoman, winning fish one by one through skill and patience, Barangaroo may have felt insulted. For Bennelong, and perhaps for other men who wanted a stake and a future among the British at Sydney Cove, wives provided this precious possibility. They could give birth to babies in this place. The new generation would belong to the Sydney country and share its bounty, because they were born in it. In 1791, Bennelong announced Barangaroo to be pregnant and manoeuvred for the birth to be at Government House. Phillip demurred, suggesting the best place would be the hospital. It's doubtful Barangaroo was even consulted. But birth was women's business, and men had no right to interfere in any aspect of it. Perhaps Barangaroo said as much, for Bennelong beat her again, badly on the morning of the birth, but she defied him one more time. She gave birth alone, in a secluded place somewhere in the bush nearby, to a daughter named Dilbong, the bellbird. Barangaroo died not long after, baby at breast. She was cremated, her fishing gear beside her, in a small ceremony. Benlong carefully gathered her ashes and buried them in the garden of Government House. He asked Philip to act as foster father to the child, and Philip found a wet nurse among the convict women. But while white babies were thriving, Dilbong died and was buried alongside her mother. Aboriginal women continued fishing the waters of Sydney Harbour at least until the late 1820s. 40 years after the first fleet, you could still see their canoes skimming the waves, little plumes of smoke rising from their onboard fires. We celebrate our harbours and coastlines in poetry, prose and art, and in sculptures by the sea. But where in Sydney Harbour, in our paradise of waters, are the great Eora fisherwomen remembered?
We're now looking across to the city skyline, with closest to us the latest part of the central business district, Barangaroo. It extends from King's Wharf at Darling Harbour to our right, to Miller's Point and its controversial pseudo-natural headland to the left, now to be known as Barangaroo Point. In the mid-1800s, the shore opposite would have been a mishmash of mainly private piers and finger wharves in various states of repair. In 1900, the government seized control to improve the port facilities, carving Hickson Road from the cliff face, a road which in the 1930s Depression years was known as the Hungry Mile, as stevedores went from wharf to wharf in search of scarce work. By the late 1960s, international shipping was becoming fiercely competitive, and the shipping container was revolutionizing the way we were handling goods, and in turn transforming both the physical and the social landscape of the waterfront. It meant larger and larger ships demanding longshore rather than finger wharves, and huge flat aprons equipped with large gantry cranes for rapid, efficient loading and unloading. This efficiency had the stated aim of increasing port activity by 350% by 2020. By the turn of the century, however, it was already evident that while the waterfront might be able to cope with this level of activity, the supporting land-based infrastructure could not, or at least not without compromising the growth of the very city the port was there to serve. By 2004, the container wharves began to close, and most of the port activity, for goods at least, was transferred to Port Botany. The government was now faced with a question of what should take its place. In 2005, an international design competition was held, and in 2006, Hill Thallas were declared winners with a master plan depicting a wedge of parkland, starting at the point and narrowing to a foreshore sliver to the south. This was balanced by a wedge of buildings fronting Hickson Road, higher and denser to the south and lower and narrower to the north. But there was no guarantee that such a scheme was economically viable and was capable of actually being implemented. From 2006 to 2010, there were a number of concept plans developed. Each successive amendment added floor space and increased height. The 2010 plan showed an international hotel on a pier jutting into Darling Harbour. These later concept plans divided Barangaroo into 3 distinct precincts: the naturalistic point to the north, the high-density office precinct to the south, and a central precinct, lower and less dense, that would favour community use. The final nail in the coffin of the original plans was the proposal by James Packer's Crown Sydney to build a 270-metre high casino on the water edge of that central precinct. Yet to receive final approval, it's clear the proposal is now dramatically inconsistent with the original concepts.
Today is a walk I'm going to keep as a highlight walk.
This park at Peacock Point was established in the 1970s, early 1970s, and another example of the landscape architect Bruce Mackenzie's work that we saw at Birchgrove Point.
No whooping. No.
What does it represent?
Don't know, it's just a park with lovely structures in natural timbers, and again using Australian native trees. It's just a beautiful set of sandstone steps merging in with the natural cliff. As we round Peacock Point, you can see very early Glen Murcutt house here on the point. This house was designed in 1974, but since it's been sympathetically added to by another architect in 2007. This is an example of good adaptive design. It's clear walking around Balmain this morning that it was laid out before the age of the automobile, and generally has resisted the pressure to adapt to its demands. Here in Datchett Street, there's no pretense of catering for vehicles as the road gradually peters out as we descend towards the harbour. It has a particular charm as a result.
Bill might have something on it.
It's a revelation to me.
It's my favourite street in Balmain.
I can see why.
I think it's just another world. It's magical.
It's definitely a highlight, Lee.
Oh, there's his name. Yeah, what's going on here? Oh, I've got some lunch. Are you knocking off the...
Hello. No, there's 8 pots coming out, madam.
I did see something on the television, and they were talking about a garden like this, and the fact that they kept losing all the lettuces, so they planted a different variety, which doesn't look like a lettuce at all. And now, so they managed to keep them because no one recognises them as lettuces.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's got a legal wall.
Not legal to do graffiti.
Oh, it's perfect for the graffiti.
This is White Bay, and opposite us is Glebe Island, currently housing exhibition and convention facilities. And beyond that at Anzac Bridge lie Rozelle and Blackwattle Bays, linked to White Bay by Johnson Bay to our left. Together this area has been termed the Bays Precinct and awaits the latest in a series of significant changes in its history. A history that has seen it transformed from a series of wooded headlands and islands to an array of bustling boatyards, piers and wharves, maritime industries and associated trades and services supplying the port needs of Sydney town.
A public abattoir opened on Glebe Island in 1860. Glebe Island was far enough away for the smells to dissipate before bothering householders. Sheep and cattle were processed here on an unprecedented industrial scale. All eat meat to an incredible extent, wrote the incredulous English observer Richard Tuppenny in the early 1880s. The killing went on through the night by the light of slush lamps, fuelled by the fat of dead animals. More than 153,000 animals were killed there in 1865, 1.25 million in 1897. Tides, winds and wakes distributed animal fluids around the nearby coves. Guts and offal dumped out to sea, washed back into the harbour. The cover of the Illustrated Sydney News of the 3rd of March 1877 showed a fishing party being attacked by a shark off Longnose Point at Balmain. It was claimed that never before were these pests so numerous and so savage. One specimen caught in Woolloomooloo Bay was filled with sheep's heads and bullock's bones. A waistcoat and watch were retrieved from another, having resisted the digestive processes that had dissolved the remains of their owner. Throughout our trek, we've been dogged by bad weather and, true to form, as we crossed the very exposed Anzac Bridge, the heavens open. we feel not just battered by nature, but assaulted by an unfriendly man-made environment as well. To get over this, we're making for the Australian Hotel at 116 Cumberland Street, The Rocks, where we'll spend a couple of nights. The Australian Hotel opened for business in 1914. More than 100 years on, it remains an attractive and well-preserved example of Edwardian-style architecture, with quality and taste present throughout the hotel. The Australian Hotel is also the original home of Australian craft beer, and it's got more than 130 Australian craft beers in the fridge or on tap. It's listed on the Conservation and Heritage Register for the Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority, and it's on the registers of State Heritage, the National Estate and the National Trust of Australia. The Australian Hotel's not just a piece of history, but a great place to stay.
It's a big night. All the proceeds of the legacy. It's super good cause. I'm really excited about it. We've got a meat tray, fruit tray, beer paddle, featuring for the very first time. We're really happy about being here. The Grifton Brewing Company and their wonderful pale ale, which I've just had one of, and they're just fantastic. So if you haven't had one yet, go and get yourself one. We have a lovely Maddie who's just joined us from America somewhere. She sold your tickets for you tonight. She's going to read out the first winner. Maddie, who's our first winner tonight?
And the first winner is B63.
Orange B63. Orange B63. Orange B63. Nope. Orange B63. No. Yes. No. Don't cheer. No. Orange B63.